Okay, it looks like our webinar is starting to fill up. So welcome everyone. We're waiting for a few more minutes before we get started. I'm Teresa, librarian here with Larkspur Library, and just to check to make sure our audio is working, can you give me a Y for yes in the chat box if you can hear me? Great. Yay, all right, very good. Looks like we're almost ready to start. We'll wait a minute or so longer just to give people a chance to join us before we get started. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. I'm excited to hear this presentation. That's great. We've got a few more people joining us. All right, well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. I'm Teresa from Larkspur Library, and we're so happy to welcome Maureen Murray Fox, our docent this morning, or this afternoon rather, from the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. She is a docent not only at the DeYoung, but at the Legion of Honor as well. And in addition to being a docent, is part of the auxiliary that puts on this annual event, Bouquets to Art. So Maureen was a member of the class of 2011, the docent class of 2011, after retiring from a career with IBM. So I'm sure that you'll join me in welcoming Maureen, and I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, before I share my screen, let me just tell you that I'll go through the presentation, and then at the end we'll have question and answer. And so I think you'll just type it into the chat box, and Teresa will help me do that when we get to the end.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's see. It's okay. Let's see if it's going to let me share. All of a sudden, it's telling me I can't share this. I know we tested it. Here we go. All right, is everybody seeing the screen, hopefully, here for the first part? So what I'm going to do today is just give you some background about this event that has become one of the most popular traditions at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. So we'll talk about not only how did it start, but really kind of what goes on behind the scenes. And it's very appropriate that I'm talking to an audience from the Larkspur Library from Marin County today, because Marin County residents have played a significant role in producing this event each year. One of the people who was instrumental in setting this up was a woman named Barbara Harbinson, who died just this past year, but she was really the one that worked with all the floral designers, and we'll talk about them a lot during this presentation. But when Teresa mentioned that I'm in the auxiliary, which is the event that helps put on this event, there is a San Francisco auxiliary, but there are two in Marin County. One in Ross and one in Belvedere Tiburon. So those groups are very involved in helping produce Bouquets to Art. We'll talk more about that during my presentation. So first of all, what is Bouquets to Art? And if it's something that you haven't been to before, then this first slide sort of gives you a graphic illustration of where you're seeing an artwork and you're seeing a floral design. In this case, we're looking at one of Ruth Asawa's sculptures that is interpreted in flowers. So that's what it's about. It is where floral designers interpret the works of art in the museum's permanent collection in flowers. So this would have been the 36th anniversary of Bouquets to Art. So it's become a very, very popular event at the museum, and over 100 floral designers participate in interpreting the works of art. Well, the way this all started is there was a group established at the museum that was known as the Museum Society. That's what is now evolved into being the Museum Auxiliaries. But the Museum Society was actually started in 1949 by the daughter of Michael DeYoung, and her name was Helen DeYoung Cameron. So she came up with the idea of having a group that would help provide financial support and activities to support the museums. And that's what's now evolved into these auxiliaries. Well, the original fundraiser they did was something called the Treasure Hunt. And what they did is they'd go out to friends, family, neighbors, and certainly members of the auxiliary themselves that would donate items that would then be appraised and auctioned off. And so here you're seeing in the middle one of the flyers publicizing this treasure hunt. And on the right, hopefully you can see, although I don't know if the graphic there for the library is blocking it, but there's a newspaper clipping from the time showing some of the members of the society or the auxiliary coming in with items that have been donated. So it would be everything from fine china to silver to jewelry to certainly art to musical instruments. And it would be appraised and then auctioned off. And all the proceeds, it was always a volunteer effort, all the proceeds would go to benefit the museum. Well, frankly, they were sort of running out of friends and family they could lean on to say, is there anything else in your attic that you might be able to donate? And so they started to say, well, maybe this has run its course, and maybe we should look at some other ideas for fundraising that would be popular and would be appealing. And so in the process of researching what might be appealing, they came across an event that was being held in Boston. And this was the Fine Arts Museum of Boston that starting in 1976 started this idea of pairing art and flowers. And so when they saw what Boston was doing, they thought, you know, that might be something that would appeal to visitors coming to our museums. And so they went and approached the head of the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco, and that at that time was an individual named Ian McKibben White. And he could see the appeal of this, but what he was mainly concerned about was, is it safe to bring flowers into the museum? Because if you bring flowers in, you got to water the flowers. And sometimes flowers come in with things attached, like bugs. So the concern was, how would you protect the artwork in the permanent collection if you brought flowers in? But they were able to prevail, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now, in addition to having to sell the director of the museum on this concept, they also had to go around and recruit participants to create the floral designs. So they reached out to garden clubs, to professional florists, to actually City College of San Francisco has one of the finest horticulture departments in the state of California. And so City College very early on embraced this as well. We'll talk more about the floral designers later, but building off of getting the endorsement of the director of the Fine Arts Museums and some of the garden clubs and florists that were willing to participate, they embarked on doing it here in San Francisco. And the very first Bouquets to Art, as they called it at our museum, was started in 1985. And so here you see a picture of the old De Young, for those of you that remember what it looked like. It wasn't all that long ago that stood in Golden Gate Park. And so the original one was held there. And the very first Bouquets to Art was 3 days long and raised $18,000 to benefit the museum. Now, initially, the volunteers from the auxiliary did everything from, arranging some of the flower arrangements that were used for luncheons and the opening night event for people to come and see this themselves. They literally got together and used somebody's dining room table to do this. And then, of course, the floral designers came and created arrangements at the museum, and that tradition, of course, continues to this day. So it started in 1985, and then it was after the earthquake, but also they moved it out to the Legion of Honor. And many of you who are listening may remember when this event was held out at the Legion, and it was such a beautiful venue to hold it at. And many people still say, gee, could it ever return to the Legion of Honor? But really the challenge out at the Legion is the size. There's one road in and one road out. And when the event was held at the Legion, the most number of attendees that ever came were 22,000. And now this event attracts 50,000 at a minimum when it's at the new De Young. So based on the number of attendees, it really drives the fact that it has to be held at the larger museum. And also, I mentioned that very first year in 1985, the event was 3 days long, but now, based on demand, it actually runs the full 7 days. So we'll talk more about when it opens, and it runs from a Monday evening through Sunday. And now there's also 2 member evenings. So it certainly attracts visitors not only from the Bay Area, but many people fly in to see the flowers and to also attend some of the lectures and floral demonstrations that occur during Bouquets to Art Week. Well, one of the first things people say are, who are the floral designers and how are they matched with the artworks that they interpret? Well, let's just start with who are the floral designers. This just shows some of them that are involved in creating the floral arrangements and the floral interpretations. So it's everything from professional florists, as you would expect, to garden clubs from not only the Bay Area, but even I think there's several that come in from Sacramento, certainly the Peninsula, and one flies in from Tokyo. So she lives in the Bay Area part of the year, but she comes in from Tokyo for this event. Here's just some more pictures of some of the floral designers. You would expect that some of the professional florists in the garden clubs would have a lot of experience with flowers, but in fact, there's many talented amateurs who also participate in this. And then, as I mentioned, students at City College that are actually going through the horticultural training program at City College. There's actually a waiting list. Some of these designers have participated for 20 and even 30 years in Bouquets to Art. So there is a waiting list, and there is an audition process where there's actually a committee that will review a given floral artist's portfolio or their website if they are interested in being an exhibitor. And just as I mentioned that Marin County has had the 2 auxiliaries and Barbara Harbinson, who had been the one that really cultivated the relationship with so many floral designers. I know there's quite a number of amateur designers from Marin County that come and participate in this. So it's always fun as you wander during Bouquets to Art to see who the floral designers are, and to look for your friends. You'll sometimes be surprised at the talent of these floral designers. Now, one thing about the floral designers is it's their concept, so it's their creativity that goes into the floral interpretation, but they also provide all of the materials at their expense, and they come in and refresh the flowers almost daily so that they always look fresh when the visitors come through. So that happens before the museum opens each morning during Bouquets to Art week. Well, I've shown you here an empty gallery. So this is on a day when the museum is closed. And what's intended to be shown here is just what happens when the floral designers come through the museum and they see artwork that's on display. And then they put together a list of their top 5 choices for artwork that they would be interested in interpreting in flowers. So here you see our American art gallery on a day when the museum is closed, and this would be where people come, the designers come through and they see what's on display. And actually there's a committee that says which works of art will be open to be interpreted for that year. So one of the things that the committee wants to do is make sure that, in other words, you don't have all the floral arrangements in one gallery, because with the crowd, you want it spread throughout the museum. And the works that are open to be interpreted can be paintings, sculpture, decorative arts, and even the architecture of the museum itself. So that's all part of what the designers choose in terms of when they submit their top 5 list of what they're interested in interpreting. And so once they've submitted their top 5 list, then there's a matching process that begins. So the Floral Design Committee of the Auxiliary looks at what people want to interpret and then tries to match a designer with one of their top 5. Now, I will tell you that, and I don't know if part of the slide is blocked with the picture there of the Larkspur Library logo, but the one on the right, if you can see it, that's a portrait of a woman, a tall woman with red hair. That's actually been the most popular piece over the 36 years of Bouquets to Art. And later in the presentation, I'm going to show you that work with some of the floral interpretations. Well, once the floral designers are matched with their art piece, then at that point, they head to the San Francisco Flower Mart to see what's in bloom and to determine what materials they will use in interpreting their work of art. We are very fortunate in San Francisco to have one of the best flower marts in the entire world, actually. So there's a New York flower mart, there's a Paris flower mart, there's one in LA, London is big, the English love their flowers. But I will tell you, when we bring in speakers for Bouquets to Art, they absolutely love going to the San Francisco Flower Mart to get their materials. So there's a lot of locally grown as well as imported flowers that the floral demonstrators and the floral designers can rely on. So that's been a real plus of this event in San Francisco. So the floral designers head to the Flower Mart, decide what materials they're going to use. And one of the things they have to be careful of is that they are abiding by the guidelines for what can and cannot be used. So let me just show you that, here's just another shot of our Flower Mart. But when they come into the museum on what's called setup day, so the very first day of Bouquets to Art, all of their floral materials and even the containers are inspected by this is the conservation team there in the white coats, And so they look at all the materials that are going to be used to be sure that there's no risk to either the canvases or, for instance, the frames on the artwork. And so this is, you know, a real diligent program where every designer's materials are inspected as they come through. And this is actually just kind of a overview of what is not allowed. So as you can see here, gourds, anything that has seeds in it, anything that would be old wood that potentially could come in with some kind of bug that could get into the canvas or the frames. They're really looking for that. I do recall one year where one of the designers was interpreting a beach scene and really wanted to include driftwood as part of her arrangement. Well, you could bring the driftwood in as long as within 30 days of Bouquets to Art taking place, you had a certificate showing that it had been fumigated. And so this designer was determined enough that she was able to find someone who had a house that was tented to be fumigated and put the driftwood under the tent and then had the certificate provided by the extermination company to say that it had gone through and was safe to bring into the museum. So you can imagine it's a pretty rigorous process in terms of what is or is not allowed. Well, once the designers come into the museum on setup day, it's a very busy several hours that then takes place. And so what you see here is on the left, you see a floral designer coming through with her materials. By the way, they are not just women. I've mentioned two women's names in my references here, but they're both men and women that are the floral designers. We see this particular designer is into the main gallery, main rotunda of the museum. So we know that she has passed muster, if you will, and is just getting ready to now set up her arrangement. In the middle, you see one of the conservators actually measuring the height of a floral arrangement. Now, this is a very tall arrangement, and it's actually sitting right on the floor, but many times the arrangements are on some sort of a pedestal or a plinth, is what it's known as. And so they measure the height of the plinth and then the arrangement above it to make sure that if there were an earthquake or with the crowds that come through the museum during Bouquets to Art Week, that nothing could be tipped and in any way endanger an art object that would be near where that arrangement is. So you see that occurring there. And then on the right, you see one of the floral designers setting up her interpretation of the artwork that is behind it. So the floral designers enter the museum about 8 a.m. in the morning, and then they have to be done by 2 p.m. because starting in that early afternoon, the maintenance team comes through, sweeps up everything. As you can imagine, there's quite a few things on the floor after everybody has been cutting and snipping and doing their arrangements. The museum looks spick and span, and literally Bouquets to Art Week starts that evening. The floral designers leave from having, you know, been in their jeans likely to set up everything. They hurry home, get changed into cocktail attire, and return to enjoy that opening night event and to visit with the people that come through that are for the opening night gala event that kicks off Bouquets to Art Week. You'll see some more pictures from that later in my presentation. What I've tried to do here is just show you some of the really intriguing floral designs interpreting works in the permanent collection. And I tried to pick some artworks that you might not have expected to see interpreted in flowers. On the left, you see one that is interpreting a sculpture that's in that vitrine behind it. That is an art piece in our contemporary art collection by an artist named Maureen Murray. The artwork itself is called Seated Woman 2 Bather. It was done in 1963, and this artist was very much part of the modern art movement in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. It was actually his wife that he used as a model for this. She herself was also an artist, but it's really a clever way that the floral designer has interpreted that piece. In the middle, you see part of our Navajo blanket collection, the Thomas Weisel collection that of woven blankets, and a really interesting floral interpretation by that designer. And then on the right, you see one of Dale Chihuly's glass pieces interpreted in flowers. So the fun during Bouquets to Art Week is to just wander the 3 floors of the museum, because these floral arrangements are on display throughout the 3 floors of the museum. Sometimes people will come and say, well, tell me, which gallery are the flowers in? Well, they're in all the galleries, and that's by design to actually not only spread out where the floral arrangements are so that the crowds can see them, but to maybe expose you to some of the artwork you might not have noticed otherwise had it not been for a floral designer interpreting some of the works in various galleries. Now, one of the questions that gets asked sometimes is, do you put flowers in when you have a visiting exhibition? And actually, I do remember one time out at the Legion of Honor when there was a Georgia O'Keeffe exhibit on, which was spectacular to see some of the flower arrangements with that. But in most cases, the visiting exhibitions do not allow us to put flowers in there. They aren't quite as tolerant as our museum has been about allowing organic materials in with our collection. So I know that, for instance, the Victoria and Albert Museum does not allow you to put flowers in with that. So at this point, it has just been the permanent collection that you see interpreted in flowers. But actually, that's one of the appealing elements of it, because if you've gotten to know some of the pieces in our permanent collection, then what makes Bouquets to Art fresh and new every year is seeing how a different floral designer has interpreted a piece that you may have seen done in flowers multiple times, but every time it's different because the floral designer that is assigned for that year brings out other elements of it that you might not have noticed. Well, now let's take a look at several of the several art pieces and look at different floral interpretations of it. This is a still life. It's by an artist named William McCloskey, and it's a rather small piece if you're familiar with it at our museum. But what the artist has done here is shown oranges, a very simple subject matter, if you will, but in various stages. And this artist was actually trained as a formal portrait painter. So details is something that, that the artist was very, very good at, but yet here he's taken a simple fruit and shown it in several different perspectives. So on the right, we see an unwrapped piece of fruit. And then in the middle, you see that tissue paper, and you see it in various stages of unwrapped on several of those oranges. The one on the top really looking like it's being unfurled. Tissue paper is how oranges were shipped at the time that this artwork was created. And then on the left, you see an orange cut open, where you just practically want to reach in and take one of those orange segments. Your mouth practically starts to water as you look at that. So the artist has kind of introduced movement and also really contrasting colors that makes that fruit, that brightness of the orange really pop for us. You see the dark blue velvet curtain behind it with both texturally and color-wise is a real contrast to the fruit. And then, you know, the dark wood and the reflection of the oranges on the wood is something that the artist has depicted in this painting? Well, one thing you might ask about this is, why would a formal portrait painter take so much effort to depict fruit? Well, the reason was that fruit had become, at this time, a major agricultural product in the state of California. In fact, it was known as the second gold rush. Once the transcontinental railroad lines were completed, it allowed them to ship not only people, but products coast to coast. And of course, we know Orange County and you know, all the growth initially that started in the agricultural industry, and certainly that's changed a lot over the years. But that's why the artist chose to depict this and this boom industry that was going on in California at the time. Well, now let's look at some of the floral interpretations. So on the left, you see one where the floral designer has really focused on the surface, the texture of the rind of the orange. And the flowers that depict that, the roses in various stages of opening, and then those little orange berries really draw upon the texture of that orange rind, and then certainly the white above it mimicking the unfurling of the tissue paper. So that's one interpretation. On the middle one, we see a floral designer who's really focused on the tissue paper itself, and the movement in the painting is being mimicked, if you will, in the flowers there. And you can imagine, as those flowers continue to open up, how that will, you know, really mimic that movement of the tissue paper even more. And then on the right is actually Floral Fashion. So on the opening night of Bouquets to Art, students from City College compete in interpreting some of the works of art on display in the museum in wearable art, in flowers. So that's a very fun aspect of the opening night of Bouquets to Art. And this, I'm going to show you some more pictures of these students, but it is a very clever interpretation. And then they go around the museum and pose with the visitors and are in front of the works of art that are being interpreted. Well, let's look at another one now. And as we do this, you should look at this painting too. And I want you to think about, if you were the floral designer that had been assigned this piece, what would you want to emphasize in your floral interpretation? So as you think about that, let me tell you a little bit about the art piece itself. It's by an artist named Chiura Obata, a Japanese artist who lived here in the Bay Area, was actually the first Asian American member of the faculty at UC Berkeley. And so he started this piece in 1912, and he actually started it when his wife had just announced she was pregnant with their first child. So if you look closely at the female nude there, you kind of see the rounded belly. She's pregnant. And he sets this in a forest setting. So we see redwood trees behind her. And then if you look even beyond the redwood trees, you can see sort of a pine forest behind those stately trees in the foreground. And notice the mist that's sort of creeping through the forest at sunset. So the artist himself started this, as I mentioned, when his wife first announced she was pregnant. And then he worked on this painting over more than a decade and continued to rework it. And ultimately, he felt that this painting came to symbolize not just a woman who was pregnant, but really Mother Nature herself. And so he has a very deep reverence for nature that I think you can see expressed in the serenity of the painting, in the beauty of the sunset and the trees, how quiet it looks. Notice how the figure's head is sort of bowed in reverence to nature, and the figure is treading so carefully on the forest floor where you see the little flowers blooming. Obata, by the way, was a contemporary of John Muir, and many of the paintings that Obata did are of Yosemite. But this one, as I said, was intended to represent Mother Nature. Well, now let's look, test your abilities now. Let's look at how several of the floral designers interpreted this piece. So on the left, you see the flowers really expressing the beautiful hues of that sunset, the pinks, the corals, the verticality of the figure and the trees, the lushness of that forest setting. And so, you know, people, as you come and you look at the floral piece and your eyes go back and forth between the artwork itself and the floral design, you really notice elements of the painting that you might not have noticed otherwise. There's a wonderful connection that you as a viewer wandering the galleries make with looking at the incredible floral designs, but then looking at what the artist, the floral artist, is bringing out in their interpretation of the original artwork. And looking at one that's different, here you see where the floral artist here is really focusing on the figure, that central figure in the foreground, the nurturing aspect of a mother and child, the bowed head of the figure, the rounded belly. So this is what makes Bouquets to Art different and innovative each year. You never would have seen these two arrangements on display at the same time. So each floral piece interprets just one of the works of art. And so as I said, it's a wonderful connection of looking at what the floral artistry itself is, but then looking at the piece and what the artist has chosen to emphasize. I mentioned that certain pieces have become very popular over the years, and this is the one that's been the most requested over the 36 years of Bouquets to Art. This is one by Robert Henry, and this is of his wife. So we had Chiro Obata picturing his wife in that previous one. This is also a life-size portrait, and at the time that this was done, as you see, 1919, she was a very modern woman. Not only was she modern because she had her own career, she was actually a newspaper woman, which at the time there were not that many women doing that, but she looks at you, looks out from that canvas in a very arresting way, the way she engages with you as the viewer. The other thing that is striking about her, and if you compare what she's wearing to others in the portrait gallery that were done about the same time, one of the things that makes her very modern is she is not wearing a corset. Now, she had a great figure, but this tall woman with this incredible red hair gazing out at you extremely confidently is one of the things that sets this portrait apart from others of its day. And then here's just some of the examples of different floral designers who have taken this piece and emphasized different things about it. You notice they all pick up on her red hair, but you know, everything from an arrangement of red flowers to, you know, actually a more literal figure of the standing woman herself. So this is one that has been the most popular. I'll tell you, if you're familiar with the museum, one of the other ones that's become extremely popular, very different from this one, is the David Hockney piece that shows the, it's actually a landscape photography where as you drive down a country lane, he shows what the lane looks like, what the trees look like during all different seasons. So it's a moving piece where the slides keep moving around. So you can see that that would be a very different art piece to interpret than this one. And that, once it was introduced to the museum, became like the next most popular piece to be requested. I think the floral designers really showed their versatility and their willingness to sort of stretch themselves in that when the museum acquired a new part of the collection, which was called Art from the African American South. It was literally artwork that was created sometimes with hidden meanings, dealing with things like the Jim Crow laws, to taking discarded objects and forming them into art. And the floral designers really loved taking these new pieces that were introduced into the collection and interpreting them in flowers. So that's just, I think, something that shows you their versatility. The floral designers, as I say, often will participate in bouquets to art for multiple years. And they say it's their chance to really have artistic expression. They're not doing a specific commission for a wedding or a specific party or just catering to their customers. It really gives them a lot of creativity in participating. And so year after year, they love doing it. Well, this is not just of a given painting, but this is actually a huge floral sculpture that is in the main rotunda of the museum. And this was the one from a year ago. So this would have been from 2019. And this piece is huge. It's massive. And each year it's different now. But this piece weighed over 1,200 pounds. It rotated above the viewers. So you see people looking up and taking pictures and just seeing this piece from all angles. There were over 10,000 floral stems used in this piece. And it takes about 10 hours to assemble it, and about 30 volunteers. And these are very experienced volunteers who work on this. The team that creates this piece, this is a commissioned piece for Bouquets to Art Week. The company that did this last year is called Water Lily Pond. It's a husband-wife team. He's an architect. She also was trained as an engineer, but then got into Ikebana and has gone off really from a floral design standpoint where they do these huge pieces. As I mentioned, this one rotated and was incredibly spectacular. And here's just a couple of other examples that have been done in other years. On the left is one that was called Elemental. And this one was done for the it was done for the 25th anniversary of Bouquets to Art. So they wanted to introduce something new, and people loved it so much that now that's continued, having a different sculpture in Wolsey Court for each of the Bouquets to Art weeks. On the right is one that was titled Flornado. So it was a giant tornado of flowers. Now, when they put up this piece, it has to last the entire week, because clearly they can't bring that up and down during Bouquets to Art week. So they really have to plan carefully which flowers will be used and make sure they stay fresh for the entire week. Another thing that's been introduced over the last couple of years is a floral wall. So people love to see the floral designs in the galleries interpreting the works of art, but actually with social media, many people like to have their picture taken. So, and then they send it out on Instagram or whatever. So here you see them assembling a floral wall, and then you see some of the visitors getting their picture taken in front of the wall. So I think you can see by some of the things that I've shown you here how Bouquets to Art started as a 3-day event, and now it's 7 days with 2 evenings, and they have introduced some new things as people, you know, things change and people give them positive feedback about things. They incorporate that and drop other things to make things new and fresh. Just like the floral sculpture and the floral wall, the Floral Fashions have been a very popular piece of the opening night for Bouquets to Art. These fashions can't last all week. For one thing, the students have to go back to class, but to compete in this competition, 75% of the flowers in the garment have to be real. And so now typically the people modeling them are not the ones that actually created them, but you can see they've really done some spectacular interpretations of the art pieces. That one that's right in the middle, she's actually modeling something that is inspired by one of the Georgia O'Keeffe floral ones. It's a bright purple flower that's in the collection, if you're somewhat familiar with it. But they go and stand by the floral, by the original art piece that inspired what they're wearing, and then have their picture taken with visitors to the opening night event. So that's become very popular. Well, this is just a summary to say, I hope that the talk has given you a feel for how the event started, how it's grown in popularity, what makes it new and innovative each year. And if you have been in the past, then hopefully in 2021, we will look forward to welcoming you back. And if this is your first introduction to the event, then I hope that you'll watch for it on the calendar and come and enjoy it, because it really is a fun way to experience the art in a different way and to just admire these incredible floral designs. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Maureen. That was just wonderful. I learned so much about this wonderful event, and hopefully we'll be able to attend it in person next year. So we do have some questions for you. Someone is asking if there's a local Ikebana chapter and have they participated?
Let me just say that first of all, I enjoy doing some flower arranging myself. And by the way, if you're in the auxiliary, you absolutely cannot be a floral designer for this event. But I have taken classes, but I've not taken Ikebana. But I do know that there are several Ikebana, I don't know if chapter is the right word, but I know there are Ikebana instructors, and they very much participate. And in fact, during Bouquets to Art Week, I mentioned that there's floral demonstrations that go on, and people go to those lectures. And I know that this year they had planned to have one of the lectures, demonstrations was Ikebana. So stay tuned for next year. Ikebana is very popular. By the way, I should also mention, I showed you that one piece by Chiura Obata and mentioned that that was his wife he used as the model. She actually was one of the very first Ikebana instructors in the Bay Area. So that's an interesting piece of trivia.
All right, and we have another question from Nancy, and she's asking, can any of the materials other than the vases be artificial?
Typically, they don't have a lot of artificial materials in them, but I don't want to tell you they never do. And the reason for that is, for instance, you might have to do like a faux bamboo or some kind of material that is not allowed in. So to follow within adhere with the guidelines, they might have to use a faux piece, but most of everything is fresh.
Okay. All right, and another question, are any of the floral designers from outside of the US?
Well, I did mention one comes in from Tokyo. So, so yes, some are from outside the Bay Area. On the other hand, there is enough interest from local garden clubs and floral designers and city college students that, you know, I think within reason they would try to support the local designers. The other thing is that they have to come in and freshen the flowers throughout the week. So you can't just show up on setup day and go to the party and then leave. You have to come in and refresh your arrangement all week, which might not be as easy for some person living outside the area to do. Now, having said that about the floral designers, let me just say that when they do these floral demonstrations and the lectures. People pay to go to those, so that's part of the fundraising for Bouquets to Art. And those people typically are brought in from outside the area. New York, Paris, London. You know, one of the things that would have been kind of fun this year is during the pandemic, you may have seen in New York that there was a floral designer named Lewis Miller who does something called Floral Flashes. So we've heard of, you know, these flash mob things that, you know, people get together in a shopping mall or something and start dancing and you know, so he takes flowers that have been used for like a very fancy event, maybe the, you know, ballet gala or something like that. And he puts these flowers in places that you would not necessarily expect. In the middle of a trash can, over a subway station, over a fire hydrant. So he was going to be one of the speakers for this year. So those people that come in typically are from outside the area. And by the way, one of the things I should have said during my talk, normally I do, is not only is it popular where people love to come and see this event, but it's been very successful as a fundraiser for the museum. So that very first year, I said they raised $18,000. Since Bouquets to Art started in 1985, almost $7 million has been raised. And because it's an all-volunteer effort, all the proceeds go to the museum. And it's gone from everything from acquiring art for the museum, like the Wayne Thiebaud piece of the 3 gumballs, if you're familiar with that piece, that was purchased through funds raised from Bouquets to Art, to more recently, the museum has asked the auxiliary to use the funds to help underwrite special exhibitions. So if you saw Monet the Late Years, or you saw the Bonnard exhibition or the Rubens exhibition that was on at the Legion about a year ago, Bouquets to Art is what helped bring that special exhibition to the museum. On to the next question.
Okay, we have another question from Barbara, and she was wondering if the floral artists were compensated at all for their work.
The floral artists are not compensated, with the exception of the people that do that big floral chandelier. So you can imagine trying to create that and assemble it with 10,000 stems. That would be a lot to ask anybody to underwrite. So that is something that is paid for. So no, they are not. Now, some professional florists likely get some publicity from participating in Bouquets to Art. But on the other hand, I can't tell you that I think they do it just because, wow, it's a great way to attract new clients. Hopefully some of that is true, but I think mainly they do it because they enjoy supporting the museum and they really enjoy the creativity that it allows them as a floral designer.
All right, well, this has been a wonderful talk and makes me look forward to next year, hopefully, when we can be there to see it in person. And I know that the museum will you know, be welcoming visitors and happy to have everyone back, hopefully next spring. Do you know if there are dates set yet for this, for next year?
No, frankly, everything, and this year's Bouquets to Art sadly had to be canceled, and understandably. It was scheduled for June. By the way, for some of you that have been in the past, March used to be typically when Bouquets to Art was held, and then the museum decided to try to do it. They had an exhibit on with Monet the Late Years, and when you have a blockbuster exhibition, it's tough to do that plus Bouquets to Art. The crowds just are overwhelming. It's not a pleasant experience for the visitors. So they moved it to June, and actually it did pretty well, and the plan had been to keep it in June this year. And I don't know what will happen for next year. I think nothing really can be planned until the museum is allowed to open. And in line with that, let me just tell you that I received a communication from the director of the museum just in like the last couple of days, communicating to docents that, you know, they're just waiting for the city of San Francisco to give them the go-ahead that they can reopen. Now, one of the things that is it's all hung and on display right now at the de Young Museum is the Frida Kahlo exhibit, which is expected to be very popular. and you know, but they'll have to clearly control the crowds when they reopen. So anyway, no dates for Bouquets to Art, and just keep, you know, watching the website, or, you know, there'll be a lot in the paper when all these museums are able to open up, and they're all looking forward to that.
All right, I know they'll want to do it safely, but it will be great to get back into the museums. Thank you so much, Maureen. That was just wonderful. And I wanted to mention to everyone that we have another art docent talk next month on the Pompeii exhibit, which would be at the Legion, and hopefully we'll be able to get in there to see that too before too long.
Great. Thank you so much for your interest and for inviting me to participate today. And I know you'll look forward to next month's talk as well.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.